Biden, in his heart, I'm sure, believed, hey, I'm helping this country. I'm getting transformative legislation through. I'm not going to step back at a time when I still have a vitality to my administration. I may be old in age, but I'm still able to make a huge positive difference for this country that I've dedicated myself to, that my son has, died in service of, if you want to think of it that way. I mean, I understand that he didn't die in battle, but, he did actually serve in the U.S. military. And I think that when you look at that, that is part of the arithmetic that Joe Biden did. The problem with that, of course, is that it created a massive issue for the Democrats. He was a problem candidate, unable to really administer the campaign as it needed to be administered. He wasn't able to prosecute the campaign. He wasn't able to show up and campaign the way he needed to. His age and his inability to form coherent thoughts in an emphatic and impassioned manner, that had a wildly negative effect. And so he, I'll just say, was forced out. I mean, we can have the conversation about he realized when he looked at the polling numbers that Pelosi showed him, Obama called him, whatever it was. I mean, he got to the conclusion that this wasn't a thing that he was going to go forward with anymore. But he got to that conclusion way too late. So he wasn't adherent to that thing that he'd said he was going to do, which is just to be a one-term president. And now, to again be fair, he did great things to normalize things from the wild chaos of COVID. He took over an administration from Donald Trump that was in total chaos and free fall from COVID. You had vaxxing, anti-vaxxing, you had closures, reopenings, reclosing, you had constant updating of information from the CDC, social distancing, not social distancing. You had all these special interest groups, the whole anti-vaxxing movement, which RFK Jr. really built his rep on, his modern rep, was birthed and was one of the things that supported Donald Trump's victory in this latest election. That was all the result of this wildness. The economy was on its side. And that's why when people say, weren't you better off 4 years ago than you are today? No, I wasn't. It was an absolute horror show 4 years ago. So Biden did all of those things. And I think carrying that, he felt, I can do more. I'm just giving the guy credit for being sincere. It was more than just a power grab. He was more than him just, hanging on to the chair in the Oval Office saying, no, you're never going to get me out of here. I love being president. The problem is that by the time he realized that he had to leave, again, maybe he was forced out, whatever, it was too late to really have a primary, I think. I mean, I know that there were calls for primaries, but there really wasn't a lot of time left. And you ended up with Kamala Harris being the only choice. And the reason for that is because the machine that was the Joe Biden candidacy, full of money and personnel and a plan, a political strategy to win re-election, that was all in place and could only be used by Kamala Harris. It would have been very difficult to blast that money over to another campaign if, Amy Klobuchar had decided to run, for example. So I think that left Kamala Harris with the situation that we talk about, and that is, I didn't think she was a very good candidate. I've always said that, but I thought she did a really nice job. I thought, given the fact that she had to define herself and given the fact that she had to also fight off the blasts of Donald Trump, I thought she did a fine job. The problem is we'll be getting into this later in the show, when you really look at the demographics of the whole thing and you look at the way people and voters went, it was a repudiation of Joe Biden in a way. It was a repudiation of the administration and of what's going on now. And you really had an embracing of what they saw, and this is a bizarre thing to say, but in Donald Trump as a change agent. And
So weird.
it's bizarre because he's not a change agent. You lived through 4 years of him. I mean, this is absurd. He's not a new face, nor are his policies going to be new. You know where he stands. And so I found the whole thing a little confounding from that standpoint. And I found the repudiation of Kamala Harris / Joe Biden administration, I found it a little bit puzzling. I really did.
Do you think that if Joe Biden had stayed in the race, that the results would have been different, that maybe America had a problem voting for a woman and a woman of color at that, and that even though he's older, maybe looked a little feeble at the first presidential debate, that men in America would have somehow been more motivated to vote for him because of his gender?
I don't think it would have been different. As I've just said, I think the
Yeah.
voters repudiated the administration that is in power now. So I think Harris and Biden would have suffered the same fate. It would have been a different kind of attack that Trump launched, but he essentially launched the same kind of attack on the administration's decisions: Ukraine, the economy, the border. I mean, it would have all been exactly the same. I think that if you actually look at what was important to people, those were the issues. And if you look at his approval rating, it's so low. I mean, there just is no historic precedent for a president who has that insanely low approval rating to ascend to another 4 years in office. So I know, I don't think it would have changed it at all. And that kind of was the predicament that the Democrats were in. That's kind of what I'm saying. When she got into the race, she's having to own the Biden administration and yet individuate somehow, separate herself. And the reality is that I thought she did as good a job as you could do, but obviously there were a couple of inflection moments where I thought she booted it. And no one's going to be perfect in a campaign, to be fair to her. But like when they ask you, is there anything you would do different? You've got to be. You can't tell me that you're flummoxed by that question.
Right.
I mean, you can even politically, filibuster that question. You could say, well, of course, I think Joe Biden has done great things for this country. I think a transformative legislation associated with the infrastructure bill. Donald Trump talked a lot about infrastructure, but Joe Biden actually did it. This is a transformative bill, blah, 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 blah. You filibuster, 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 filibuster. You keep talking about the bill. And then they'll come back and they'll, yeah, but is there anything that you would have done differently? And then you say, yeah, of course. I mean, I'm a vice president to a great president, and I'm there to support him. So I'm not here to say I would do this differently, I would do that differently. I'm sure there are a lot of things I would do differently. That's however you want to say it. And if you want to get more specific, you can say, hey, I would have absolutely acted more aggressively, or as aggressively as we could, on the border, because you know that means something to people. But you can say, but to be fair to my president, there were other constraints, other things are going on. However you want to say it. I mean, just you can generalize it. So I felt that was one moment where she faltered. But back to your question, it wouldn't have mattered. It wouldn't have mattered. I mean, look at these results. It's insane. In a second, we'll put up some demography on what happened with the election, and it just would not have mattered. Kamala lost the moment she said she is Biden 2.0, says Hassan. Again, I think that reflects her predicament, which is I've got to be loyal to the dude I'm with. The guy who brought me to the dance is Joe Biden, and yet I somehow have to pivot to being a change agent, but small c on change, right? I don't think it mattered. It was Trump's to lose. Trump is a boardwalk get-rich scheme, and 70 million bought into the timeshare of dreams. That is just AI virtual reality. Bought into the dreams that are just AI virtual reality. Yeah, Peter Newton, I think that's right. I mean, I think everybody got enrolled in Trump University. I really believe that is what we know it's a scam. We know it's a con, but apparently many others really believe it. And by the way, they're not stupid people. A lot of very smart people are on the Trump train for a lot of different reasons.
Yeah.
And we'll be talking more about that as we get into, as they say, the demography of the race. And by the way, I promise I'm not gonna open up a microscope on every little bit that happened, but I think it is instructive, and so we'll talk about it. And then the Democrats, I said this, hours after the polls closed, Democrats have to have a real, sit down with themselves, because this just in, guys, you don't understand America. You don't.
Apparently
you do
not.
not understand America, and you better begin to understand America and get rid of the old school institutional Democrats who just think that people care about democracy. I've told you on the show over and over and over again, they don't. They don't care about it in the way that they're going to vote on it. They care about it. They want democracy, but it's not the thing that's putting food on their table. It's just not, Kim. It's not. I mean, if you want to argue it with me, I'm happy to have the argument with you. It doesn't put food on the table.
There was a man we played yesterday, a clip from CNN, Urban, said democracy is a luxury when you can't buy, dinner,
Exactly,
or when you have no money. And I disagree with that. I would rather have less to eat and have a democracy to live in than have cheap eggs and gas and live in a dictatorship.
Well, I mean, first of all, no one sees it as that choice. Of course, that's absurd. I mean, that's an absurdist. I'm sorry, I'm calling you out on that, Albert.
Well, what does he mean,
how can
then?
I call Kim out?
What does he mean then? Democracy is a luxury when you don't have money to put food on the table.
He means from a political standpoint, to underscore democracy is a losing argument when it faces off against economic peril.
What I'm saying is dumb. That is dumb. The people that have fought and died for democracy in this country, you're going to give it up because we're going through some tough economic times? Democracy has to be the center point of America. How can you say that democracy is somehow less important than the economy? Democracy is it. If we don't have that, it doesn't matter how much money you have. We might as well pick a country.
Let me just say, first of all, this democracy thing, I mean, this is part of a much bigger conversation, and we've got the Roastmaster General waiting, but I very much want to have it with you, and I'll just give you this preview into what I would say to you in a longer conversation. When you say democracy, what do you mean? What is it that when you say democracy, and you say then democracy is the centerpiece of this country and it's everything, then
Sure.
what does that mean?
What I mean is the Constitution. What I mean is the freedoms that we have as Americans.
Exactly. You mean the freedoms.
There are people in other countries that don't have that. There are people in other countries, they can't just pick up and travel. They have limited range of movement. The government tells them exactly what they need to do. You could live in China. You don't have freedom of speech. You don't have many rights. You could be thrown into prison in the middle of the night for doing God knows what. So
you mean freedoms, and I agree with you. But when you say democracy, that's not the way people hear it. And I'm trying to explain in just a general sense why the electorate doesn't respond to the word democracy, because they don't hear it in the same way you do. Democracy, because in truth, democracy isn't the freedoms you talked about. It's not the Constitution. Democracy is my vote and your vote, and we elect somebody. That's what democracy is. There's nothing in democracy that's associated with freedom, okay? So we could elect somebody democratically through the democracy and lose all our freedoms, because that person we elect takes them from us. So you're talking about freedoms, and I'm making an important distinction here, I think, because I'm trying to say, if you guys, Democrats, feel as though that's the thing that you want to communicate, then you've got to find a better word for it and a better argument for it. I'm telling you, democracy is this ethereal thought. It's vague. It really is, Kim. And I don't think it faces off well against things like the economy and immigration issues. Clearly, I'm right, because look at the election. So more on this later. But
your MAGA hat's on the way to you in the mail.
Yeah, I mean, no, this is it. This is it. Kim is talking about liberty. Exactly, liberty's a much better. And if you had Trump's campaign message was Trump will fix it. So in that sense, he's going to fix the economy. Yeah, again, we'll talk more about the election. And look, I think it's instructive to talk about this election. I think there's a lot about America that's reflected in this election. But when we talk about democracy, again, it's about freedoms and liberty. I like that point. And by the way, liberty would have been a better word. And freedoms, you could have spoken about women's reproductive freedoms. You could have talked about the freedom that we all have. No, again, but that matters. And here's the last thing I'll say, and our poor Roastmaster General is waiting. This is the last thing I'll say because I was very surprised by this. This is something I was wrong about. And you know, I'm very seldom wrong, everyone.
Do you know who I am?
I really am.
I'm kind of a big deal.
If you've watched this channel for a while, I'm very seldom wrong. So here is something I was wrong about, and I own it. I said that if women's reproductive rights was on the ballot in critical states, it would bring, women to the polls. You didn't have to bring them because they would feel the need and they would feel compelled, and they should feel compelled to roll back these ridiculous pieces of legislation and this ridiculous Dobbs decision. So I felt that if you put that on the ballot, it would juice return. It would juice the number of people who voted and returns, and would be followed by a vote for Kamala Harris, for the Democrats. Because how can you vote for protecting women's reproductive freedoms and not vote for the Democrats who are all about protecting women's reproductive freedoms? Well, it was just the opposite. People went to the polls. Look at Missouri, for example. And this is the most insanely radical state when it comes to abortion laws, okay? Women can't get an abortion. It's virtually it's an open and shut from point of conception virtually. They went to the polls and they rolled that back. Now women can make that decision, the difficult decision to have an abortion often. They can make that decision and get an abortion in Missouri. But who carried Missouri? By a lot. Donald Trump. Now, it's a red state, to be fair. But my point is simply that was played out in other states also, in which abortion was on the ballot. So women came to the polling place, but they ultimately cast votes to protect their reproductive freedoms, but also to elect Donald Trump. I was wrong about that. I thought they would go Kamala Harris. So Kamala used the word freedom often in her campaign. Okay, well, maybe she did. I certainly just felt I heard a lot about democracy. Lesky Alfonso Martinez says, in 1959, Cubans saw in Fidel the solution to inequality and other mainly economic problems. They let him do and supported him in every step, even giving up the 1940 Constitution. The rest is history. Yeah, I think this is exactly right, Lesky. I think Hitler rose to power in the economic ashes of Germany. There's no question these guys rise to power in dark times economically, and then they take away all of your liberties. It's a scary time. Now, I'm sure there are people watching who are Trumpies and MAGA people or MAGA adjacent or Trump adjacent, and they're going, gosh, man, you lefties, you libs, you really you make everything so dramatic. Donald Trump is going to take away your... So, listen, this is to be continued, but I think it's not... I'm not saying that Trump will do that, but I am saying that lefty's right. Lefty's left. Lefty's correct when he says that there is certainly historical precedent for using tough economic times, and these aren't really even as tough economic times as some of the others to which he's referred, like what was going on in Cuba, what was going on in Germany, etc. So if people think the prices will come down under a Trump-Vance administration, they are fools, says Nullifidian. All right, to be continued, everybody. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.